At first, it did not look like a mistake. It looked like the final move of a conqueror who believed he could no longer be defeated. By the summer of 1941, much of Europe had fallen with terrifying speed. Nations that once seemed powerful had collapsed in weeks. Armies had been surrounded, capitals occupied, and millions of people now lived beneath the shadow of the Third Reich. Germany appeared unstoppable. But behind the victories, behind the speeches and military parades, one decision was already beginning to change everything. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, like a crack spreading through the foundation of an empire. On June 26, 1941, more than 3 million Axis soldiers crossed into the Soviet Union. Thousands of tanks, aircraft, artillery pieces, and military vehicles moved eastward in the largest land invasion ever attempted. The operation had one objective: destroy the Soviet Union before it could recover. German commanders expected a short campaign. Some believed the fighting would be over within weeks. Others predicted that the Soviet government would collapse after a series of devastating defeats. At first, those predictions seemed correct. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were captured. German forces advanced at a speed that shocked the world. City after city fell. The road east appeared open. But this was where victory began to become dangerous. The farther the German army advanced, the longer its supply lines became. Fuel, ammunition, food, replacement parts, and medical supplies had to travel across enormous distances. Roads turned into mud. Vehicles broke down. Railway systems could not be converted quickly enough. Men who had marched into the Soviet Union expecting a rapid triumph began to realize that the enemy was not disappearing. The Soviet Union was losing armies, but it was creating new ones. It was losing territory, but gaining time, and time was the one weapon Germany could not afford to give away. Then came the decision that deepened the crisis. Instead of concentrating every available force on one decisive objective, the German advance was divided. Some armies moved toward Leningrad, others turned south toward Ukraine. The Central Forces, which had been moving toward Moscow, were repeatedly delayed and redirected. Each decision had a military reason. Each new target seemed valuable, but every delay pushed the campaign closer to the one enemy no army could surround or destroy: winter. By the time German forces finally approached Moscow, the situation had changed. The soldiers were exhausted, the machines were worn down, supplies were scarce, and the temperature was falling. Engines froze, weapons malfunctioned. Men wrapped themselves in whatever material they could find. Many German units had not been issued proper winter clothing because the campaign was never supposed to last that long. The invasion had been planned around speed, but speed had vanished, and without speed, the entire strategy began to collapse. The Soviet government did not surrender. Moscow did not fall. Instead, fresh Soviet forces appeared near the capital. Some had been transferred from the east after Soviet intelligence concluded that Japan was unlikely to attack Siberia. These soldiers were prepared for winter warfare. The Germans were not. In December 1941, the Soviet counteroffensive began. For the first time, the German army was pushed backward on a massive scale. The myth of invincibility had been broken, but the consequences went far beyond one failed battle. Germany was now trapped in a war it had never been designed to fight. A long war, a war of production, a war of fuel, factories, manpower, and replacement equipment. And in that kind of war, Germany faced enemies with far greater resources. The Soviet Union possessed vast territory, enormous reserves of manpower, and industries that had been moved beyond the reach of German bombers. Factories were dismantled in the West, transported eastward, and rebuilt. Soon, they were producing tanks, guns, and aircraft on an extraordinary scale. At the same time, Britain remained undefeated. and only months after the invasion began, the United States entered the war. Germany was no longer fighting a series of isolated enemies. It was facing an alliance with industrial power that the Nazi war machine could not match indefinitely. This was the true consequence of the mistake. The invasion of the Soviet Union did not simply open another front. It transformed the entire war. Germany had entered the conflict, relying on quick campaigns and decisive victories. But in the East, it encountered distance, weather, resistance, and production on a scale its planners had underestimated. The war became something larger than strategy. It became a race of endurance, and Germany had started that race already running out of time. There would still be victories. There would still be moments when German forces appeared capable of changing the outcome. But the balance had shifted. At Stalingrad, an entire German army would be surrounded and destroyed. At Kursk, the German military would lose the ability to regain the strategic initiative in the east. From that point forward, the Soviet advance would continue toward Berlin. The decision made in 1941 had created a battlefield so enormous that Germany could never completely control it. Every kilometer conquered required men to defend it. Every destroyed Soviet unit was eventually replaced. Every month that passed strengthened Germany's enemies. What began as an attempt to secure total victory had created the conditions for total defeat. That is the most dangerous thing about history's greatest mistakes. They rarely appear foolish at the moment they are made. They are often presented as bold, necessary, even brilliant. Only later does their true shape become visible. The maps change, the supplies disappear, the casualties rise, and suddenly the decision that promised victory becomes the decision from which there is no escape. The Second World War was not decided by one battle alone. It was shaped by countless decisions, sacrifices, accidents, and acts of resistance. But the invasion of the Soviet Union forced Germany into a conflict it could not finish quickly and could not survive indefinitely. It turned a war of movement into a war of exhaustion. It gave the Soviet Union time to recover, and it created the Eastern Front that would eventually consume the heart of the Nazi military machine. The mistake did not end the war in a single day. It did something far more devastating. It made defeat a matter of time.